Greetings, send you all some warm, positive vibrations. So, this is Kwasa Peaceful Eating, aka Body-Culinary. And coming on today in the beautiful quiet, welcome. I really enjoy the early wee hours of the day because it is a time of you can really hear your essence, right? You're on board divine innate intelligence communicating a lot more clearly, right? And it's much more peaceful, at this hour. So a lot of the content for the Cocoon, a lot of this content is going to be moved to another channel. But I'm going to share now. So if you happen to be up early, or when you're awakened, or if you're in the cocoon process, then you'll have access to this. So you'll also see in the comments, if you'd like to support the channel, you're welcome to do that. And the intention is hopefully this communication can be something that can benefit you. So today's communication is around being triggered, triggering each other, being able to identify when we're triggering each other in a triggered state, and then also seeing how we can become present to our self-medication, right? And self-medication, for many of us, is on autopilot. So it's no secret now. Something that's trending right now is the rapper and entertainer DMX, right? His transition, his passing. And it's an opportunity, definitely, when someone has passed, to reflect on what's important. And also, many of us can resonate with DMX's trending. It's something that we can recognize, if not within ourselves, definitely within men folk around us and in our community. And this is in no way limited to chocolate folks in the Afro community, right? You can travel globally now and you can see substance abuse in the East Indian community. You can see it exists in the Asian community. It exists in the European community. You can see it on the continent of Africa. You can see it in Central America. You can see folks that, you can see traumatized folks, even in different economic brackets. Definitely you can see it. There's this stereotype and the stigma that only folks of a certain economic bracket do drugs, right? Because they become the poster or the face of drug use, right? Usually the poster child looks like they're from the hood, or they're chocolate folks, or folks that are so-called poor. And so the marketing and the messaging and the stigma is not usually assigned to folks that have more resources at the disposal, or who have a suit on, or who have letters behind their name or access to certain resources or education. They don't receive the stigma. As a matter of fact, substance abuse is glamorized, right? And it's laughed off. It's not taken as anything seriously. The dysfunction and the results of it are, they don't seem to have as much weight. As a matter of fact, some folks may even view it as elite circles that you want to get in, in the movies, it's portrayed as you want to be in the elite circles with money when it comes to getting high and doing drugs. And there's stigma and there's disdain and there's a looking down on folks of certain economic bracket. And that's a whole narrative that is perhaps something we can be unaware of. So it's definitely an opportunity. We can choose to reframe the narrative, have a healthy curiosity to see what kind of lessons we can garner from another human being from DMX's life. I didn't know him personally. Many of his patterns and his traits and his personality type He's definitely a man that represents many of the men that I've known growing up. Not all, but definitely I'm familiar, you know, with the DMX personality. In fact, he's many of the men that were in my neighborhood growing up. Many of the peers, you know, I grew up in the hip hop culture and the hip hop age, and so you can recognize if we slow down that he was triggered. Um, there were some clips that are now available that are trending more, where a person, a community healer, that is her profession, and she's trained in it. Her name is Uyama Razak. He did a few videos. I watched a few of them with Uyama and also his son, where she was attempting an intervention for him to heal his relationships with his son. And it was very telling, it was very revealing. I think it's very easy in this time to look at these screens as voice, as if we're watching a movie. And I don't know if many of us would actually admit that either these can represent our family members or even ourselves, like the patterns of it, even though it may not be drugs per se, whatever his drug of choice is. But even as women, it's more socially acceptable for us to medicate with food. And so, because your mama or the prototype of big mama, it's more socially acceptable, and it's not. We've been desensitized. We don't take it seriously because us being overweight or the symptoms or the effects of medicating with food is joked about in a lot of our comedy. Money is made off of it. You know, I've often reflected for many years how our pain is a joke, and the struggles that we go through are continue to be a minstrel show, and folks profit off of our stories of pain with no intention of resolve. The money made off all of the movies don't go into and they're not reinvested in our healing, you know. So it seems with the comedy and the entertainment, and I would say no offense, even with the church, we don't seem to move past trauma bonding, slapping five, comparing our pain, aka trauma bonding, getting a good laugh, or getting very emotional. You know, even in church with the music, they make us feel good, but if you examine the messages and the music. And again, anything that I say here that doesn't resonate, please respectfully, you can leave it right here. It's just one woman's perspective. Greetings. I welcome a healthy, respectful dialogue, right? It's just one set of eyes, one perspective. But when I reflect as someone that grew up in the church, in a Pentecostal church, a very religious family, and I don't think that in and of itself is a bad thing. You know, do we reflect? Do we just hold on so tightly to something? And I get it. We're very protective of our upbringing and our culture. But at what point do we pinpoint and we reflect to see this is what worked. This is what we can hold on in principle, right? This is what we can hold on. These are things that haven't produced a result because we're not healthy in these areas. All the praying and the so-called consecration fast did not. I don't look around my community and see that there's no longer rampant obesity that has only increased, right? So we get so caught up in the emotion that we don't, it doesn't appear based on results that we have been effective in managing the stress. We've done a lot of religious bypassing. And so many of us sit in silence. And I reflect on it from a child. I reflect on just patterns. I'm like, why are the adults, why are they doing this? Why would somebody stick needles in their hands? Why? Why would you beat up on your wife? This is what I thought of as a child. Then when our pain is seen in real life, no one knows what to do about it. Correct. And so this is a distinction. I'm not here to demonize anyone's religion. I'm not the food police. I'm not the hair police. Just one woman's perspective, because there's some things, I don't know everything, but there's some patterns that I have distinguished, right? And so I can recognize, even as a child, there's something that I'm not aware of here. There's a blind spot. There's something, and I seek to understand, because I can recognize if you don't fully understand or comprehend a problem, then it is futile. You're not in a position to come up with an effective solution. And I can recognize that the main one that's going to benefit from me coming up with a solution is going to be me. Is I stand to gain the most. And most people don't have the time, no, nor do they see it as their responsibility. I can't even say it is their responsibility to come up with solutions for me. So that is my responsibility. And so in making a decision to take on accountability, right? This is not to say that things have not happened to us. I'm not going to do that. I will not be dismissive of other people and their trauma. That's sometimes in taking a spiritual bypass, right? On being given not a spiritual or a pseudo spiritual, a religious bypass is often I can recognize now and I can articulate as an adult is actually dismissive of our feelings, our emotions, and our trauma, right? So I can press replay clear as day. When we go to early prayer at the church and the altar call and the begging and the pleading for relief, that's human. You want some kind of relief. This has been passed down, this cultural trauma and our ways of so-called dealing with it that have been ineffective. We pray, we want relief, but it's temporary. It has been temporary. And as I got older and I started to understand what some of the older generations went through in the South, the terrorism of seeing a cross burned on your lawn. Oh my gosh, we've all experienced some kind of trauma, but I can't even imagine what that's like, and being fearful for your life, or men having to, if anyone saw Rosewood, having to hide out in fear of being killed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, being lynched, and a lot of the officials, sheriffs, being in on it. That isn't spoken about in our school systems. So it is dismissive culturally. And then in order for us to function and to be able to get jobs or employment, we've had to stuff it down, but that stuffing does not make it disappear. It has not disappeared. It has not disappeared. All the praying has not made the trauma disappear. It kind of forced it into another area of the brain. And so it shows its face. It shows its face in the medication. It shows its face in the triggering. It shows up. It shows up. So what are we to do with this? It's not like there are extensive studies that are not compromised by profit with us in mind. They're not extensive studies or research that have Afro people really in mind for our healing, because the short-sightedness of other human beings is that it's more profitable to exploit other people's trauma. So, which is actually a very fearful mindset. And so it is extremely clear that it's in our best interest to get a basic comprehension of what's happening, right, with our psyche, with us being triggered. This is now language that is just coming on the scene. Now it's just in recent years that we are hearing the terms narcissism, narcissistic abuse, seeing a rise in sociopathic and psychotic behaviors. We can definitely acknowledge that the children that have been exposed at a young age to sexual violation, the numbers, the percentages, the facts are there. The facts that now it's commonly known that many of our boy children have been violated. What should have been intimate, safe relations at an appropriate age, now it's known that's not the case for our girls or our boys. So this has not been processed. Praying over it is not enough. It has been demonstrated that it is not enough. So I want to take a moment to just breathe. If you have a glass of water, I welcome you to get some water. You're welcome to take and write on your glass. These are simple rituals that are free, that we have access to the breath. We can write on the glass. Most of our body is water, and be very intentional. Right? And I say these quote unquote rituals, not in a mukajuk kind of way, right? Not in a spooky way, but understanding the human psyche in terms of programming. Other folks understand how to program the psyche and to elicit very specific behaviors. So it is in our best interest to start to understand and to unpack these things. So I invite you to breathe and take a glass of water. And the intention over your water. The intention, you can write it on your glass or affirm, is clarity. Right? That is the intention, is to seek understanding so we can be effective. The intention as you drink, right? And this is, not meaning to trigger anyone, but triggering happens, right? And it triggers at a part of our brain that is very primal, that has nothing to do with logic. So I invite you to press pause on a judging and a condemning kind of vibe, a condemning kind of feeling. I invite you to pause it for yourself, for BMX, or anybody else. The goal is clarity and comprehension so that we can become relaxed, we can have more of a clearer vision and insight, and then proceed forward and be effective in the actions that we choose. Right? So, triggered. If we to look at any of the clips of Inyana Vincent, Heal My Life, there were several of them where she did an intervention and she sat with him to mediate and to hold space. So that's something perhaps to recognize when we're sitting with each other. A lot of times, our parents are triggered, grandparents are triggered, older generations did not talk about certain stuff. And I think that's something for us, perhaps we can be so heated because they're our parents that we don't see them as human beings. And that's without faulting. But they, I'm sure, have been through unspeakable types of trauma. And as children, that's not really our business or our job, However, it is what it is. As adults now that we are adults, perhaps we can bring some compassion, again, with the goal being clarity and understanding. So quite often we're triggered, parents are triggered, and we're ricocheting triggered emotions back and forth on each other, or we may not even be aware of triggered. What the heck is triggered? You can feel it, it's palpable, but we don't know how to identify or to place it. Again, I never heard the term narcissist or triggering come up in church, and I spent a lot of time in church. And so perhaps it is time for us to have an open mind to other types of solutions, right? And maybe perhaps can acknowledge we don't have the desired result. We want to get to the root of what's going on. There's a blind spot here. There's something that we're not understanding. So in our own triggered, or I call it triggeration, we may not understand is, let's say perhaps we're speaking to our spouse or partner or friend or parent, trying to seek understanding. Why didn't you see? Why didn't you protect me? We may not understand that they're also triggered and stuffing. So we're kind of all in the same boat. And again, without demonizing religion, it hasn't been effective to help us unpack all the trauma. Actually, it can have, and it can be examined, has had a reverse effect without us even knowing it. The constant state of begging and pleading and begging, please help me, please help me. What happens when you know in the back of your mind that the help didn't come, but you keep begging and pleading anyway, right? And also after the begging, pleading, the accountability and the behaviors, the specific behaviors, what are alternative behaviors to self-medication? These were never conversations that were had. None of these conversations were had inside of the church. So even as parents, we may, in ignorance, be triggering another person thinking that we're being effective in talking to our spouse or to our sons or to our daughters. We're triggered and doing the best that we can, perhaps sometimes in ignorance, and just not understanding that when people are scared that we'll lie, or when you're shamed, it can leave you open and vulnerable to predators, because you just it's these things are not logical. They're not logical. Understanding the human psyche, this is not logical. So I invite you to give yourself a break and to have an open mind to understanding your own psyche to the best of your ability, to hold space for yourself. Otherwise, it's unlikely we'll ever be able to hold space for other people. Or even in the space that we hold, just like with church, we'll feel better. But as soon as the triggers kick back in, we go automatically into self-medication. And that in and of itself is a great catalyst for depression, feelings of failure, beating yourself up, because we don't understand. And what's interesting is that many marketers put extensive money and study into what elicits a reaction to purchase, to make a purchase, right? They have team meetings. This is big, 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 big business. So the self-medication quite often is on autopilot. I don't know if anyone out there can relate. I may not have been obese, but even from a young age, just in my own thinking, I could articulate, because I found, fortunately, movement as being very therapeutic. But I could recognize that folks will give you a pass if you appear to look okay, if you don't appear to be, quote unquote, obese. But I think you can definitely be spiritually and mentally, emotionally obese. Definitely. And at some point, we'll medicate. I've met people that look like, they don't look overweight, in particular, that were bulimic, and Afro people, right? Sometimes we can attribute this to other cultures, right? So let's take a sip of water to find some clarity and relaxation. You may be given a pass because you look okay, or even someone that's worked as a fitness trainer and a coach for many, many years, and um, done fitness competitions. I even had to look after doing several competitions, and having several of my besties, my good friends that were also moms with full-time jobs and children that were doing fitness competitions. What was at the root? Now what I can say was positive is that we found a tool and movement and fitness as a way to definitely to relieve stress, to improve our esteem, and a healthy alternative to medicating with food. Now anything can be taken to another extreme, and that was actually an eye opening in the world of fitness. So let me switch gears for a moment, and let me just touch on freedom hair, because that's a lot of what I discuss on this channel, even though it's dark here. Freedom hair, when I say that, meaning what I call Afro locks or semi-freeform locks, or in essence, celebrating our unique beauty mark and how we popped out onto the planet, celebrating and acknowledging our unique presence and our unique features. And I think I mentioned maybe perhaps on this channel, or maybe I did a little mini video on TikTok, using our hair as a spiritual tool. And what do I mean by that? In the essence of, and I am not a Rasta per se, although I like many aspects of the lifestyle, right? But I do not claim the religion of Rasta. What I mean by freedom here, that essence of, I don't know, it's often said rebellion, but I would say just the freedom, just to be yourself. I don't know if you've ever seen children that were allowed to maybe wear the little costumes, a ballerina or Superman to school. And often I would see that in other cultures, right? Without being shamed, allowed to be expressive, allowed to not have combed hair, right? These things are different culturally without making them right or wrong. The relaxation and the confidence, even if you look culturally, not that other people don't have dysfunction, as they mature in age, you notice that they're much more confident in feeling. It can be observed that children and people that were allowed to be expressive and allowed to explore their emotions and that were supported, allowed to articulate and encouraged to articulate what they were feeling, they have a tendency to feel a lot of confidence and actually can speak with a sense of authority and trust in themselves as adults. So with freedom here, I think it's definitely an opportunity for us as Afro people, or I'm understanding that not everybody that comes to this channel has this particular beauty mark, but whatever that is for you, you may have, slanted eyes, you may have very, very pale skin. I know I've interacted and had as clients people from all different walks of life. I can definitely speak as an Afro person to this unique experience when this hair has been teased, just how it has naturally appears. If it's not slicked down, that was seen as a sign of neglect or not self care. You'd be ridiculed for that. So to be able to reframe your own narrative and determine not just your style, it's bigger than style, but a confidence in literally how you popped out onto the planet. And not merely just accepting it, but celebrating it and really embracing it. It can be very, very healing. So I would even say that freedom hair, and that could be if you shaved it off to uh, or some people call a baldy. I call it a peach fuzz, whether it's low, medium, or short. We have so many visual examples of alternatives. I still think, though, it's very strong. Many of us are scared to cut our hair off because, again, the implications in society. I can definitely, especially with Afro women, right? Old school folks will say a woman's hair is her glory. I can definitely tell you from personal experience, I have never felt more beautiful and liberated than when I cut the chemicals out of my hair, because it was an epiphany that I did not have to do anything to myself to be beautiful. Not only beautiful, but absolutely stunning. Now, there were folks that approached me that asked me about my, I don't know if you can say it online, your actuality. Um, asked me all of those, which I thought was very interesting, as a young adult. And I was just thinking, this is my hair. And even my grandfather said to me, your hair is your glory. And even though it was a peach fuzz, I felt like it is my glory. But I never got more compliments every single natural style I have done. So in terms of a social experiment, working, not only just working, because it's like just like you know, this is what I have, but not just working with I got, but the discovery, the actual discovery that there was not only was there nothing wrong with me, that uh, celebrating what you have brings such a confidence, which relates energetically as an attractiveness. So I'd most likely, just me personally, most likely recommend that most people, if they're really struggling, cut the hair off. But that's just me. Nobody's necessarily asking me. But most folks that will consult, I would probably say to embrace what it is you have, because it can be very confronting, the shame, the absolute shame that we have around something so natural as our hair. It's actually mind boggling. I would even say the same thing with our weight. If you've got a roll, stretch marks, if you have a bigger body type that may have more adipose tissue on it. This is not to say complacency with ill health, but to say there's a confidence that comes with fully owning all that you are. It can actually neutralize a lot of the things that we're triggered by, the messages that we're getting that we're not enough, if we don't fit into a certain body type, if we don't have a certain type of presentation. So freedom hair, whether my hair was short or it's long, is definitely, when I say a spiritual tool, I literally mean taking a lot off of the table, like removing the distraction of all of this pent up energy and focus on trying to be validated externally. And so taking that off the table to actually stand and look at yourself and appreciate your features and have a focus on health, which, as I say quite often, is our ultimate number one beauty product, is health and relaxation. Right? Taking the time to breathe and sit in the throne of the consciousness of the the responsibility for this wonderful body temple that you have, even if it doesn't appear to look the way that you want it. It's yours. It's a divine vehicle that allows you to experience human life. So the hair, or what I'm terming freedom hair, in this term Afro locks, and it can even be short. It is definitely a spiritual tool that it can allow you to turn inward and to remove just that fear, right? The fear of not being validated, and being very intentional about choosing to validate self. Right? So we take a moment to get some water. So taking off a lot of things off the table, and wanting to be validated, which is natural, but just where it's coming from, the root of external validation, taking it off the table and choosing yourself. That is something that definitely, the hair, our crown, can be very representative of. So that's why I said that the hair is definitely a huge option for spiritual, as a spiritual tool, because it's something we have to live with every day. Just like we have our breath, accessible to us. So something else I wanted to touch on is reclaiming and restoring our personal integrity, right? So many of us, again, and this all is linked to neutralizing. It has tremendous implications and possibilities for neutralizing all the triggers, right? So reclaiming personal integrity, many of us are out of integrity. And I would even say, call it like a kind of a nagging torture. A torture. So, for example, if we're constantly medicating ourselves with chips, or even if we're raw food vegans and we're going to buy all these treats. I spend a lot of money on food in my day. But if we're buying lots of usually heavy nuts and salted nuts and kale chips that are very, very greasy, and we're comforting ourselves very much like a cigarette. We're comforting and soothing emotions with food. Now, I want to make a distinction between green juice. Let's say, for example, using green juice as a way to fortify our nerves, right? Because B vitamins are some of the very vitamins that are depleted when we're under a lot of stress, right? So B vitamins are very present inside of green vegetables, right? Also, a lot of our nerves are taxed and depleted when we're consuming lots of sugar, refined sugar, and artificial sweetener. And even again, as in raw foods, or I like to say whole living foods, and patterns, getting quiet, right, to hold space. Some people would say shadow work. I would say cocoon, and also cocooning while you're awake, turning your awareness inward so you can be present and look outward. You could even be medicating with too much fruit. We're just using fruit to get a sugar hit. Now, again, we're depleting lots of nutrients, but quite often, if we're not being very active, we're not athletic, and we have lots of adipose tissue, we could be eating too many calories and too much fruit, and using the food to get a dopamine hit, right? There are chemicals to make us, quote unquote, feel better in a very artificial way. So, even with healthy foods, we can be using them to get a hit, a chemical release, and I invite us not to make that bad or wrong. And it is a way to find um, adequate portions for ourselves from a nutrient standpoint, and also understanding just how much fuel our car or our tank needs, right? And there's a way to determine that in a very sane, calm way. So reclaiming our integrity would be an example, be in our quiet moments, knowing if we're doing something on autopilot that we can recognize as too much, as excessive, or as a way of just making us feel emotions, right? Or softening emotions, numbing emotions, trying to feel, trying to not feel. That's not coming from a place of nutrition. That's coming from a place of um, trying to emote or to not feel using food externally, if that makes sense. But again, it's used when we're using food very much in the same way that we're using a cigarette, or that we're using shopping, or that we're using what naturally be our intimate sacred relations, right? Interrelating. So I hope that makes sense, right? Reclaiming our integrity would be doing the things that we know we need to do to stay healthy. And very specific examples would be a movement practice, specific nutrition, recognizing things that our bodies actually need, the B vitamins, where we get that from in our food, things to nourish our joints, things to fortify our body so that our immune system can deal with everything that's being put upon it, building a 401k in terms of nutrients for our future, things we may go through like menopause or different phases of life, all the stuff that's built up in the body from all the entertainment, eating. So restoring our integrity would be an example of cultivating a movement practice, having a practice, a spiritual practice, I would call it, a health practice of designating time to prepare the best quality, high optimal fuel for yourself. Again, as a spiritual practice, because this vehicle houses the spirit while we're on this side, right? And as a health practice, I like to liken it to a 401k plan. Not doing that. And also, in addition to that, I would add gardening as a way to reconnect to nature, of which we are a part, as well as for relaxation, right? So, not being in action around those specific practices is like a nagging thing, because we need to be healthy and vital in order to enjoy this life, to have mental focus, to be able to be actually present. Those things need to be intact, and they are really great forms of stress relief that we all have to eat, right? We all need to move. So, these are areas that need attention, that require attention on a regular basis. So perhaps organizing these things and understanding that these things are, I don't really want to make it optional, right? Because for example, I need my elimination system to be able to function properly. Otherwise, that's going to stop the whole mechanism from performing. So understanding that and comprehending that internal hygiene in terms of what we're eating, having a movement practice, having some form of stress release is critical. It's critical to us not only having an enjoyable life, but being able to mitigate and neutralize stress, right? And triggers, right? That are there. Even with this beneficial conversation, it's not going to make the trauma disappear, because that is a work. It actually takes some effort. It can be very rewarding, right? And you can experience a lot of relaxation as you get clear. And it could also be very calming to finally have a workable strategy and a way to approach your stress, right, and your triggers. I wanted to touch for a moment on crying. And crying into approaches, one of my spiritual aunties used to say to me, crying is cleansing. And again, we can avoid crying out of embarrassment. I'm not saying you need to go to work or start crying in front of everybody. However, there may be times when that happens, and sometimes we can be shamed out of crying. However, I do invite you to consider that crying is very cleansing, and after you're done crying, it can be such a release. So I invite you to hold space for yourself. This is males and females. You may need to make it very private and create a space for yourself where you can even set the tone for it. Like if you have been on beautifying my space, having pleasant scents in my home, maybe having an area where you have your journal or some pillows, or, making your space very beautiful, or some plants, and allow yourself sometimes, the time to mourn, and to acknowledge, and then to, after a specific time, so that you can let things go, but you can process the emotions safely and acknowledge all the things that we have been stuffing down, sometimes without even realizing it and being on autopilot. As we cry and we cleanse and we have that release, then we have the opportunity, and this may take a while, right? And this may be very organic. We have the opportunity to now let things go. Like, we can get an actual release, let things go, and to reframe our narrative. The story we constantly have on loop, the things that are standing out in our personal story, the story that we constantly, we want to be heard. Every time we meet someone, we tell the same, usually most of us will tell the same stories. But the stories, if we take a look and we see that we're still medicating, or if our body is at an unhealthy weight, which, by the way, is just a symptom of where, and an expression of where our headspace is at, right? This is a tremendous opportunity for growth and leverage. Crying and cleansing can be very beneficial in providing a space for us to finally resolve certain things, traumas, and to let them go in a very genuine way that's personal for each one of us. So we have the opportunity to get some kind of a structure, right? A structure for accountability. And what do I mean by this? And accountability, right? The part that we can't see, that's not tangible, the mental stuff that's going on, right? That if not addressed, we'll continue to just put clothes and trying to use intimate relations, so-called intimate relations that are not so intimate, shopping and food on top of it, right? Getting a structure. By structure, that could be simple rituals that you're doing, or being very intentional. For example, in the Cocoon, or this is an example of what we do in the Cocoon, actually being very intentional about taking the time, right, to process emotions, to journal. Just like we're taking the time to prepare our food, and we're being very intentional to take the time to get into action around a movement practice, right? These are all expressions of accountability. There are actions attached to accountability. So we're not just talking about words and affirmations, right? We want to grow past words and affirmations, because the results are in the doing. And many of us are even waiting for motivation. And I have found, after several decades and working in food and fitness, and a lot with food addiction and food fixation, right? A lot of these words are loaded, that getting into action can quite often shift you out of what I call stinking thinking, can shift you out of the automatic pilot of medicating, like sometimes almost immediately. At the same time, and it has to be done on a regular basis. So providing this space, creating some kind of support for yourself, and some kind of positive accountability is key, right? And so whatever that looks like for you, accountability works, because that childlike part of ourselves that is very much still, that doesn't have an age, but is very primal. We can liken it to a child. It's going to act out in order to protect itself, and that is beyond our rational reasoning. We can try to restrain it for a while, but it's there, and that is its function, to protect us, but it is not a logical part of ourselves. So many of us maybe perhaps have never had this conversation, and haven't had it acknowledged, or even have known how to approach unpacking it. In Alcoholics Anonymous, usually people have a sponsor when they are experiencing a relapse. So to be able to have a safe space, to be able to call someone and say, like, I really want to eat this ice cream, right now, or I really want to pick up my black book and call my ex or somebody randomly to get with, just to make myself feel better. And there could be a lot of shame attached to that in society. So creating maybe perhaps a sponsor. I mean, look, these are serious levels of addiction. Different types of Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. The holding space and having someone that you can call or something you can turn to that's going to give you some objective, safe space feedback can be huge. And I'm sure there's a reason why um, there's so many 12-step programs, right? So I invite you to consider what that would look like for you, having some type of support. For example, there is something that's coming up and that we're working on in the Kacoon, which is a simple practice of not consuming after a certain hour, right? So that your body, right? And we provide education. Education is huge, it's huge in your toolbox. Because sometimes we may, for example, want to do things like this, but don't seem to be able to. And I've found over the years that some basic comprehensive education is so useful in helping folks to press pause. I know it's definitely been helpful to me to help me press pause, even if something seems so enticing. And once I'm empowered with education, I can know this has a specific result. And I'm able to think more objectively, okay, I see what's happening here. Every time I engage this, I'm keeping the cycle going. So education, comprehensive education and support, right? Having someone to call or some kind of support to have a healthy, respectful discussion and feedback, or a place just to express different things that are coming up for you as you look to press pause on automatic pilot when it comes to medicating yourself with food in particular, but as well as with other substances. So these are some of the things that I wanted to go over today. Now, hopefully this doesn't seem too heavy. However, at the same time, there is duality in life, and I think we can even be set up. You're welcome. It can be a setup to think that life is all about sweetness, right? And again, this can be maybe perhaps um, part of what we've been conditioned to expect in being so um, religified, as I call it. The joy and the singing, that part is great, but it's not reality that we don't feel these things. So support, not just in the form of joy. Joy is very, very important, by the way, and finding things where you feel joy. Some of us may have forgotten, maybe feeling so heavy we may have forgotten about the things that actually bring us joy. But definitely some tools, right, that may feel brighter on a brighter note, and some things that we can get into action around are creating support for ourselves, cleaning. Cleaning can be such a relief to put on some music, or even if you don't have access to music, starting to organize a drawer or clean the refrigerator can be very extremely therapeutic, beneficial, and it can be very psychologically freeing, because actually as you are working things out in your mind and you're organizing things in your drawer or around in your environment, it actually provides and opens a space in our mind. So I found it extremely helpful over the years when I'm feeling something to just start cleaning something, a drawer, the bathroom, the sink. It can be another alternative than just picking up the phone and calling someone for a hookup. Unhealthy hookup, or going into just autopilot behavior. So we can actually take autopilot and use being on autopilot to our advantage. So if your habit perhaps is to start cleaning something when you're doing something, that can actually, you're using habit to your advantage. Proactive music. I'm a love of music, can be really, really huge in your toolbox. And what I mean by proactive music is being that music is messaging and it's actually programming, and it elicits emotions, being very specific about the emotions that you would like to feel. For example, I love music. I love soul music, but I realize some of the love songs, so-called love songs that are talking about cheating or that have a victim narrative, aren't the healthiest thing for me to listen to. And they're not so proactive. They don't get me into action around what I say are my core values. So proactive music, sometimes it might be instrumental. For me, it might be Afro Brazilian house that makes me feel like dancing. Totally can shift your mood. Can totally shift your mood. So proactive proactive music while you're decluttering can be so helpful as a tool. So perhaps in the cocoon, I will share some of my favorite music. Um, some of them, many of them are instrumental because sometimes I don't need to hear any lyrics. And some of them do have lyrics that I found extremely helpful. Some of them I've been using for years that help to shift me out of what I would call stinking thinking. What was the other thing? So proactive music, being very intentional. Yeah, so being very intentional when choosing and selecting music, and using music as a way to emote, right? Again, part of this whole communication and presentation today is about becoming present and acknowledging just how much of our lives we are on literal autopilot. And I'm actually humbled with the many years that I've been in personal training, fitness, healthy eating, a holistic lifestyle. I am humbled. I am humbled by the fact that our minds are so malleable and we're still so easily influenced. And there's that part of the brain that is just illogical and it is functioning on autopilot. So in accepting that, just intuitively years ago, I was like, well, if I'm going to be influenced by habit and habit is so strong, then I might as well make habit work for me. So I invite you to consider, how can I make habit work for me? For example, something I've been saying for years, if you know that sometimes we can be, I like to put labels on us, but some people might say lazy. I would say on autopilot, right? As human beings most of the day. Then if I place a beautiful glass of water and it's en route to the bathroom and it's conveniently placed, I notice that I will more than likely drink from it just because it's conveniently placed. I've also noticed with clients and also as family members, if I have a huge basket of really attractive fruit and or vegetables, that usually when people and I place it conveniently where folks and strategically where folks have to pass it and route somewhere. Next thing I know, all the fruit is gone because people are picking it up as they're passing. So that would be an example of using habit and autopilot to your advantage, because it is definitely a part, of our psyche. And then now today, just moving into the last part of today's communication, is being very intentional in relationships. First, relationships first, literally with ourselves. And I've had lots of young people ask me, what does that look like? And I have tremendous compassion for that, because I remember being in my 20s, concepts that my beloved godmother was saying to me, they seemed to make so much sense. They felt right, but I didn't understand. Quite often I was thinking like, well, what the heck does that look like? I don't know what she means, because there were concepts I wasn't familiar with. So being very intentional with your relationship with yourself. An example of that would be literally maybe setting a timer or taking a break in between work, right? 5 minutes to just quickly journal without judging yourself, to kind of dump and release a lot of the thoughts that are in your head onto paper without any kind of censoring, and allow what is going on within you to dump out onto paper. So that's also representative of our relationship with ourself, right? Because then we're processing our own emotions, our own thoughts. That is literally, something that can seem so esoteric or so intangible. That actually is an example of our relationship with ourself, getting to know ourselves, getting to be, or to be very purposeful in acknowledging what our own thoughts is and our own psyche, because it's moving really, 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 really fast. So our relationship with ourselves can be expressed in taking the time. I've often, for many years, observed many of us feeling like, I don't have time, and that can be very valid. However, a shift in narrative and a shift in perspective is always so helpful. And comprehending, if I don't have the time to take care of myself or to prepare healthy food. That's actually a very lacking in poverty type consciousness, um, and a lack of awareness. And it's also interesting that I've noted over the years when I've done health seminars at big companies, I've noticed the folks that are in top positions at the company usually would be at the gym, with personal trainers at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, like recognizing it as a necessity. Whereas I noticed most of their assistants said that they didn't have the time to exercise or to work out. So I always thought that was very interesting how many wealthy people acknowledge the need to and the value in keeping themselves healthy, and that it had an actual cost to it. I find that many people don't run the actual numbers of putting off exercise and not prioritizing it, and it actually does cost us a lot more in the end. So, being very intentional about our relationship with ourselves, that can show up and does show up in movement practice and breathing and journaling. See, if you're giving a different context and perspective, that can like flip, okay, that can flip your narrative like this is actually essential. When the impact, when the realization of how essential these practices are, then perhaps we have more of a open mind to the costs of what is costing me not to do these particular things. And I also wanted to relate being intentional around parenting, right? Not putting ourselves in harm's way out of our need or desire. And this is just one person's perspective. If it doesn't resonate, feel free to leave it right here. But the considering so much what we want to do and the experience we want to have, maybe perhaps not considering that if we haven't handled or addressed certain things, that will have an effect on another human being that can't fend for themselves, that can't make that decision for themselves, right? If we're bringing them into an unstable situation, it doesn't mean that we're not that we need to be perfect, but the tangible actions, being responsible and being honest with, if we don't have a healthy environment with stable parents and security and things that we haven't experienced, we'll likely project this onto infants and children out of our need to feel wanted. And we can perhaps be projecting a lot of our emotions, which again can be equivalent to a religious bypass, right? It doesn't mean because we have children that we're processing all of our emotions and dealing with all of our trauma. Perhaps sometimes maybe something for us perhaps to consider before parenting, definitely as women. And there's those that hold children. And if you don't have children, you may likely not really get the impact or have a frame of reference beyond the baby, the infant phase of just how much human beings require. However, if we do look around at the myriad, the so many of the traumatized human beings walking around on the planet because they didn't get the lap time, they didn't get what they needed emotionally and mentally, that we may not be really recognizing and mature enough to realize that we're not in a position to give that other than cute clothes and, you know, playing with babies and stuff like that. It can be kind of delusional, a bit of a fantasy, right? And understanding that human beings may need a lot more than just what we have the ability to provide. So to be intentional around that, to actually do the tangible work of preparation before that. And maybe perhaps the last thing that I'm going to touch on today is that need to parent and nurture, especially as mothers. This can be for men too, but definitely as women. I invite folks to consider something that could be very therapeutic, not projecting, but holding space for a young person that could use mentorship. Kind of think of like what you would have needed or wanted someone to say to you, or to hold space and to give you clear support and direction that can actually fulfill a lot of that need to nurture and to parent. So these are the things that I wanted to touch in on today. Some of this content is only going to remain here for a very short period of time. Eventually, most of the content around this subject matter, around the cocoon, will end up on the website and on some other platforms. So if you are if you're on this channel, I hope that you have found this information valuable. I invite you to replay this while you are decluttering. I invite you to leverage the internet for education as a way to find some tools for personal development. I invite you to really, if you find that you are not in a relationship, or even if you are in a relationship, to really cultivate the relationship with yourself, and to hold space for yourself, and to see if you can assess if you're getting into action, around things that you say, not that I say, you say are your core values, right? And that will show up a lot in your self-care, right? Your practices of a personal movement practice, very needed, right? Not just optional, needed. Um, the need for high quality, optimal fuel, peaceful consumption is what I like to call it, rather than a label, right? Because our core values can guide a lot of our decisions. So, a movement practice, peaceful consumption, consider it maybe perhaps as a spiritual practice, reconnecting to nature for relaxation, and also being reciprocal, right? Because the home that we have in the earth is a living, breathing organism. So perhaps these things can change our perspective. So I'm encouraging you to intentionally create a great day on purpose. If you need to make the space to cry or to journal, that's fine, because crying is cleansing. Hope you found this valuable, and I will see you again in the cocoon. We're going to continue to get into action. It's a time to be very intentional about turning your attention, reclaiming a lot of your intention from everything, pulling your attention outward, and pulling a lot of that intention in to make the time, to take the time, not just make the time, to take the time to prepare beautiful food for yourself, healing food for yourself, to take the time to cultivate your movement practice, to take the time to start to grow a garden, whatever your living space is, to take the time to start to appreciate some of the other foods and tools that we need in order to feel nourished and to revitalize ourselves very intentionally. Express a lot of thoughts I have, just too busy, right? So we're going to take the time, being very intentional, because I get the too busy, but you'll turn around and weeks turn into months, turn into years, and before you know it, you may not realize that you're totally depleted. Now you don't have the energy, you literally don't have the energy, and you may be totally depleted. It may catch you totally off guard, and you may not feel like you can recover, right? So, for many young women may not, I don't want to go into another subject, don't even anticipate or have no idea of what menopause is like. Or as someone as a fitness coach, have no concept of an injury or not being able to do something, So I invite you to consider, if you don't have the time to nurture yourself and take care of yourself, that's kind of backwards, without judgment, without condemning. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't expect your car to go on a long journey without proper fuel and maintenance. Okay, you create a great day.